What does that have to do with preschoolers?
Thank you. So first of all, I'm like, why are we talking about preschoolers when we're talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict? These kids have at minimum 13 years of education to learn before they're even ready to have a conversation about something as entrenched that adults can't even figure out. But now we're going to talk to like 4 and 5-year-olds. So I didn't get that snarky about it. I just said, you mentioned, very young children, preschool children. So what I'm trying to understand is, as far as your understanding of the zone of proximal development, at what point in presenting information, whether it's about the conflict or anything that we would otherwise have thought of as an adult situation, problems created by and maintained by adults, where does scaffolding end and indoctrination begin? Like, at what point do you think that is? He goes, I don't believe in that. And I said, I'm sorry? Like, I was like, what? Come again? So that's one of the ones I made last night. It's not that much better, but I was playing around, okay? I said the same thing. I was like, my point is, there was all this dead space, and I'm like, I don't need that much dead background. The background's just there for like atmosphere. I don't need, but what I don't like, because I've tried it before, is when you do this one, which is, it's a little too, I don't know. Well, what happened? It's too big, but also
so bright.
it's so bright. But also, there'll be people that are working with me remotely who have some not so awesome background. Like, you have a good background. My background's fine, whatever. But when there's a giant mismatch in backgrounds, or the person is really far from their camera or something, like, it's so much more noticeable when you're touching each other. It's like Deb's face is huge and that person's like 5 feet away from the camera.
There we go. I'm matching your background now. All right, since we got all these damn books.
Yeah, I just have a few.
Gotta let everybody know I read.
Yeah, this is a little more aspirational than actual, but there's plenty of.
I used to have a really big library. I used to have a really big library, and then it's a long story, but basically a whole bunch of my 2 bookshelves worth of books got sold without my consent. Yeah. I don't feel like going into it, but right. And I mean, part of it was my irresponsibility for not having a place for them to be, and my parents had them, and I was stationed in New York, and then they were like, "Hey, dude, this is taking up a lot of space. We're gonna sell it." And I was like, "Can you not?" And they're like, "Well, Anyways,
come and get them, but
I'm in New York.
My kids are lucky that I can't seem to part with books. I have this obsessive compulsive, it's a book though. And someday it will be like War of the Worlds and there won't be books and I'll be the guardian of the books. That's literally how my brain works. And so I can't, I've got children's books that they probably don't print anymore because they're super offensive.
I do there are some old books that I do appreciate that I sometimes grab. I have one, and it's a book right as the Iron Curtain is falling. Yeah. And it's psychologists in the West discovering research studies that were occurring in Russia and trying to find similarities between the two studies on tobacco cessation is most of it, right? And
really?
Different things. And so because the Iron Curtain, we really didn't know what was going on. And then it's this weird time capsule book that has no scientific relevancy, but has tons of cultural historical relevant, but only to weirdo nerds like me that like reading psych papers, right? But it's really cool because it's them realizing that the Russians were doing the exact same things and were finding the same things, which was this really kind of almost a moment for psychology to be oh, what we're doing is kind of scientific, right? Because there was a lot of question. And of course, now what they do is not scientific.
No.
But there was this question at the time that because it was a soft science, that it was all made up mumbly, mumbo jumbo. And then finding out that the Russians were a totally different society.
Yeah.
Freud. No, hold on. I got to fix something.
I'm half kidding.
I get so mad when people talk smack about Freud because Freud doesn't get enough respect amongst psychologists and amongst modern people because everything that Freud discovered we just take for granted as common knowledge.
That's true.
like
true.
the existence of a subconscious.
Yes. Yes.
Like obviously there were
philosophers
that believed that,
right.
but he was the first one to really like be like, no, this is a
problem
real
is,
thing.
The problem is what people remember, what lay people remember most about Freud or know about Freud is all the sex stuff. They don't think about things like ego, id, superego. They're not thinking about
or defense mechanisms.
Or all the things that you said that we take for granted as like, well, duh, everybody knows that. Like, no, at one point in time, people didn't know that, you know?
Right.
So you're right. And I was half kidding. And I just meant that a lot of his
I'm not
work,
offended.
no, a lot of his work by today's, or not today's, maybe 50 years ago, scientific standards, we might say were really good observations and so on, but I don't know that I would go so far as to call it scientific. He just happened to be right about a lot of stuff that was figured out because he was smart and a good observer of human beings, and he spent a lot of time talking to people lying on couches. But if he'd done experiments, it would have been probably unethical. I mean, I don't know. They just didn't really do that at the time. A lot of it was still theory until we were able to prove it. And now, I mean, prove or demonstrate it, not prove. But the problem is, like I said, what people remember is what they take away from a lot of these things is the thing that the person themselves probably wouldn't have wanted you to be walking around with. You were talking about the Russian psychology stuff. You know Vygotsky. I'm sure you know Vygotsky.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's famous for scaffolding, which probably
correct.
For you in education is probably a big thing for you. Yeah.
It is a big thing, and I don't know any teacher worth their salt that would say that, you know, he was wrong about scaffolding. Okay, that's another one of those things we take for granted, that with a guiding adult or person who knows more, they don't have to be an adult, they're just somebody who knows more about the subject you're looking at, you can go farther than all by yourself figuring it out faster. Okay, there's like circles of, you know, zones of development, and there is a zone that you can't go past because now you're too far, and now you're just preaching or you're indoctrinating or, you know, you're talking to a wall because the person can't get it.
You have to be in the proximal zone of development.
Correct, the zone of proximal development. Well, I went to I don't want to call it a conference. I was in a cohort with an organization that I guess teaches people how to be Israel educators, like educators about Israel. And I was sent to this, my former employer. And
was this for Black Cube? No, I'm just kidding.
No. But I'm sitting there, you know, in this session and the first session, and they had this guy. He was like a really older guy, like in his 70s, who did the intro to the whole weekend, you know, like, or the whole 2-day thing. And he said, this is what, and he says, you know, what I've learned after all these years is like children can learn. Children at very young ages, even preschool, can learn way more than we thought they could. And he starts, and I'm like, okay, you know, I'm with you. I'm like following along with his line of, you know, thinking. And then he brings up Vygotsky and he starts talking about zones of proximal development. And when all was said and done, and he was done talking, and he said, you know, we teachers have to get in that zone and all this. And it was a little suspicious because it was starting to sound a little like some of the garbage I've heard from the Marxist educators as far as what the role of the educator is in the child's life, which sounds a little less like guide and more like director. And so after he said, any questions? So I raised my hand and I said, yeah, I'm very familiar with Vygotsky, studied him in graduate school, et cetera. I said, what I would like to know, in your opinion, since you said that we should be speaking to preschool children, and the whole cohort was meeting to discuss the conflict. It was conflict education, not conflict resolution, conflict education about narratives around the Arab-Israeli conflict. So the whole 2 days that we would otherwise have thought of as an adult situation, problems created by and maintained by adults. Where does scaffolding end and indoctrination begin? Like, at what point do you think that is? He goes, I don't believe in that. And I said, I'm sorry? Like, I was like, what? Come again?
You don't believe in the existence of indoctrination?
I said, well, because in my question, I said, because we know that children under a certain age, certainly in preschool, I kept it focused there. I wasn't going to go with 16, 17, 18, whatever. I'm not going to do that. I just said, because we know they're pre-rational, I said, which is one of those things we take for granted. Thank you, Piaget. And brain science for the last 100 years. Pause.
Another person that does not get enough respect, freaking Piaget. They're like, his models were off by like a year. It's like, the dude was a psycho.
It's over 100 years ago, people.
It's like the dude was a psycho genius that was just sitting around trying to figure things out. That was like, he was crazy, right? Piaget was crazy. And he was trying to understand how can developmental psychology prove the existence of God. Like he was crazy. Okay. He was a wizard in a wizard's tower that still discovered stuff hundreds of years ahead of his time. And then people are just like, yeah, but he was a crazy wizard in a wizard's tower. And it's like, yeah, but what about all this stuff he discovered?
He was right about, it's like, and we've
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But like you, I can see both sides. So it's like, I can see that, there was a devoted communist person I would have argued about a lot of stuff with Vygotsky, but he wasn't wrong about scaffolding. And to his credit, he fought Stalin and his goons on the individual. He was still trying to maintain the autonomy of the individual in terms of learning and pursuing things. And Stalin didn't like that. So Stalin was unhappy with him.
So if you look into the history of a lot of Russian scientists, especially early on, you'll find that a lot of their writing has been likely destroyed, and that a lot of them were very individualistic because of the rationality that came from being a scientist. That they weren't all like Lysenkoist, creating new science from belief. Right.
They were just naive believers in the idea of a utopia, which they were wrong about. But
a lot of them were ardent individualists that were anti-communist, but were just in their country and had a government over them. And we're like, yeah, communism. Anyways, this is how this works. Right? Like a lot of them are not true believers in any way, shape, or form.
No, that's true. But I mean, I've read enough of his own writings that he in the beginning, yes, he was. So, but I asked this question and I said pre-rational. He interrupts me, okay, and he says, "I don't believe in that, and I don't believe, keyword, that children are pre-rational." He said, "I believe they are rational," and I'm like, "Have you spent much time with toddlers, sir?" I know. I was like, I'm sorry, what? So he actually argued that, and he never answered my question. Remember, the crux of my question was, where does scaffolding end and indoctrination begin when we're talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict? Right? And nobody has even taken a position. By the way, the whole 2 days, nobody took a side. And these are all Jewish people, I would say with one or two exceptions. All of them are Israel educators. And they were still like, there's narratives on both sides, And I'm like, yeah, I get it. There are narratives on both sides. But at a certain point, values come into play. At a certain point, truth and facts and reality has to assert itself. And you're going to have, this side's a little more right about that. And that side's a little more right about that. I mean, you can't just be, everyone's equal and everybody's fine. And so we get to the end of the 2 days and I'm sitting there feeling so unsatisfied because I'm like, my brain wants to make some judgment calls here. And y'all are like really... What is the point of this? Okay, narratives. Yes, I get it. Everyone has a narrative. They're not all equally valid. That's just not how life works. But here's the guy saying children are rational. He's in his 70s. He's advocating that we teach this conflict education as far down as preschool. And he doesn't explain why.
Like as someone
I was horrified. I was like, no.
As someone with two toddlers, right? Obviously, one of them is an outlier because one of my toddlers is autistic, right? But I have another toddler, for lack of a better word, we'll say is normal, right? The idea that my daughter is rational when
I'm sorry, I'm a 15-year-old.
When I can be like, hey, honey, we don't have potato chips, okay? I have fruit snacks. I have, lactose-free ice cream that won't give you diarrhea. I have brownies. I have cheese sticks. I have all of these things. I don't have chips.
On the floor,
I want
demanding
chips.
the potato chips.
It's like, okay, well, they don't exist, and I cannot materialize them. I'd have to order potato chips, and then she's like, chips now. You either have, just the idea that she's rational, that she has the information. First of all, children at that age lack the capacity for inductive and deductive reasoning beyond one step.
Thank you.
Right? They can do one step. They can do A to B to C.
The guy literally wiped the record
they
clean
cannot do
of everything we know about the human brain. I was like, wait, what did just
happen
here?
They cannot do A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C. They can only go
Dude,
A
5
to B
minutes
to
ago,
C.
they thought if the ball rolled under the couch, it had disappeared. Okay? They've only just been able.
Listen, that's not my fault that y'all have stupid toddlers that haven't figured out object permanence yet, all right? My baby girl's got it, all right? My baby girl knows it's under the couch.
I'm saying, my point is, obviously it's not 5 minutes, but you know what I'm saying? It's not that long ago. They're closer to the time where the farthest they could see was the hand in front of their face, okay? So
well, it's like
the idea
until like in preschool, most preschoolers don't have theory of mind, right?
No.
Like they don't understand that you aren't in their brains knowing what they're thinking to some capacity.
Right.
Right?
That's right. That's why they get so frustrated.
Or that the sun like doesn't literally revolve around like their day, right? Like my daughter, for example, she's very, very, very smart, right? Yes. Very intelligent girl. She's way ahead of her time on most stuff. She's already starting to read, right? And she's just turned 3. And so, but like when it's nap time and she's mad, she's like, dude, sun's up. Like sun's up. Like the sun is up. And like there's no part of me that can explain to her like, hey, you were at the park all day and you're going to be, for lack of a better word, we can censor this on YouTube if we need to, but for lack of a better word, you're going to be a cunt if you don't get a nap, right? Like, so you might want to go ahead and get a nap for a little while. Like, promise it's not that big a deal. And it's like, sun's up. And it's like, that didn't stop you every other damn day from getting, from getting a nap. Why is this a special thing now all of a sudden?
Well, it was just surreal to sit there and listen to somebody who was not only an educator himself, so-called, but who was presiding over a gathering of like some 40 or 45 educators who work with mostly teenagers and below in different Jewish organizations, youth organizations, like the one I used to work for up until a week ago, and was telling us that, these... Oh, yeah, I resigned.
So this was a week ago. I want to know this story. I want to know this story so bad. Like, what is going on?
Well, basically, a friend of mine drew a picture, and she did a great job on it about the life cycle of a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And it starts off with, a mission, and people are really mission driven, and they're really excited about passionate. Okay, fine. You hire a lot of people who are passionate and really great at what they do because they're motivated by a mission, not so much. Money's nice, but whatever. And then, I'm a libertarian, so there's nothing about that, but they're motivated by mission. Then it takes off through their hard work and their commitment. It starts to take off and it starts to grow. They get donor attention. Now the donors come in and start infusing it with a bunch of money. But the more donors come in, the more the donors want certain things.
Right.
And they start making demands. And those demands may or may not align with reality, the mission, etc. And I joined the organization right at the time where they got a giant, they hired somebody to work for development. Nothing against her. She's a great woman, but brought in a ton of money, very successful at bringing in money. Challenge is, it's not necessarily for the person bringing the developer to the table to manage, or not the developer, the donor to the table to manage the donor. That would be more for general directors and C-level employees and people like that to try to like say, we love your money, but remember, we're on a mission. Mm-hmm. And instead, I think what happened was money, yay, and suddenly things shifted to butts and seats, more people, more kids, recruit. They couldn't understand why we needed such a big budget for so few kids, when in fact delivering the very high quality education we were trying to deliver does cost more than the typical youth group social program. Like, we're just like, hey, we're gonna have parties, whatever. We were delivering top-notch education plus guest speakers who are...
So hold on. So before we get ahead, right, I don't know exactly all of the ins and outs of the work you're doing, and I also don't want to reveal anything that might be problematic, right? But could you be like a little bit more specific about like what the organization was?
The original mission was to teach Jewish teens about their own identities and history. I hate to use the word identity, but there it is, as far as like that you don't necessarily need to be an observant or Orthodox Jew to still be Jewish, both in terms of how other people are going to perceive you, but also yourself, that's a piece of you. And that if you decide you don't want that to be part of your life, that should be your decision. That shouldn't be because you feel pressured because of persecution or people mocking you or this or that. That should be a very personal decision, how much you want to live in that life, in that space, whether it's spiritually, culturally, whatever. So we were organized around the principle that the best way to fight anti-Semitism was to be proud of your heritage. So that if somebody comes along and says bullshit garbage about Jews, you just don't take it. You're just like, yeah, that's not true. And you know enough to say that's not true and have a rational debate about it or bring stuff up or just ignore it or even just not take it in and internalize it and feel this need to disavow it or prove it wrong or worse. I'm going to join, the groups that are, against Israel or whatever. Also, we were trying to educate them about the fact that Zionism increasingly is getting to be so close to, like, people are saying they're anti-Zionist are to a large degree these days just kind of hiding that they're anti-Semitic, because to separate the Jewish people from the concept of Israel, you got to go back thousands of years. I mean, it's just, how do you separate those things? It's like saying, I'm not anti-Native American. I'm just anti having them have reservations or have land or have any kind of recompense for land that was stolen from them or, whatever.
To play devil's advocate a little bit, right? Like, that is a position that can exist, right? That is a position, that is a possible existence, but it is more likely. I agree with you that it is far more likely if someone says that is probably just a cover for another belief. But I mean, it is a position
maybe once upon a time when Israel was not such a, a 75-year-old nation state that has existed and defended. It's, at a certain point, you're like, okay, so should Armenia not exist? Like, I mean, at what point
but if
do
you're
you
an
decide?
Anarchist, if you're an anarchist, for
example, sure.
Right?
If you're, then
if
you're an anarchist,
nation state, right?
That's the whole other conversation. Then I want to hear these people be anti-France and anti. No, I get it.
I'm with you. I want to talk about this. I actually do want to talk about this. But I want to maybe stay on track to why you left the organization.
Well, let me just finish. Yeah, let me just finish it because, it wasn't the mission. The mission of teaching kids to be proud of who they are and stand up for themselves and learn skills like public speaking, debate, critical thinking, things that you and I both know they're not learning in school, along with a hefty dose of some European history, which they're not learning, some North African history and Middle Eastern history, which they're not learning, just from a factual basis of like these empires happened and then this happened and these people moved around and just even learning what the diaspora is and how it started. They may very well formulate their own conclusions that they're like, yeah, I don't know, I'm a two-stater or I'm a no-stater. They might decide that.
Can I pause real quick? Can I pause real quick just to say that if we can be a little bit bigoted for just a moment, the most Jewish thing I've ever heard is we're going to solve anti-Semitism with more education and critical thinking skills of the youth. It's like, how do we combat anti-Semitism? They need to know more of the Torah. They need to know more.
Well, not the Torah. It's actually,
I know. I'm kidding, but it's
secular.
Funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it was a secular organization, not to say that there weren't observant kids who came, but there were also a lot of atheist kids who came, right? But the point was not about the Torah so much as, there are arguments in favor of both Israel and the continued existence of the Jewish people, like none of this like into the sea stuff, that are just grounded in reality and history and so forth. Things that, our mutual friend Casimir might talk about.
Okay, for the audience, Into the Sea would be
that's a Hamas thing.
That's a Hamas thing about where when asked multiple times about treaties, they're saying that they will push them to the end of the sea, so they will be out of Israel.
Correct.
Clarify that in case somebody understood what that meant.
Yeah, that's what it is. So anyway, there I am working with this organization, and my role was a community developer. I was supposed to serve as the person doing outreach to the community and trying to get more students to be aware of our existence, get their parents to sign up for this education. But I also served as an educator, meaning that during the school year when we had our sessions, I would also teach some of them, if not most of them. And so there was a lot of event planning, teaching, community development, blah, blah. Okay, Loved the work. Like, the work was not my issue. Not a big fan of recruiting because it's kind of salesy. And I just think if you deliver, I've always felt this way, even about sales. The few times I've ever been in sales and marketing, my attitude was, if you deliver, really deliver, sort of under promise and over deliver, what all that, and you are top notch quality, word of mouth, it'll sell yourself. Focus on delivery and focus on giving the people you have in front of you the very best experience, and they will serve as your best recruiters. Unfortunately, they wanted more people faster, because why do you need all this money if you're only serving so few people? And I was the only employee where I am in Charlotte. I was the only person located here working on this community. When I started in December, there wasn't much of a pipeline. The people who've been here for the past 3 years really hadn't done much except serve a little group that had self-selected itself and asked for us to be here. So they didn't do anything to add to that. And so I had to start from scratch. And they came to me with a number. I said, where did this number come from? 36 kids. We only had like 20 last year. Where were we getting this? Like, the donors. And I'm like, that's not, do you know the demographics of this city? There are 15,000 Jews, period, of all ages in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County. Like, where am I getting these 36 teens who aren't also signed up for sports and BBYO and the C-Teens and all the other organizations, or just don't want to be bothered on their weekends going to something else because they're not really very observant or they don't care? So in other words, how do I sell the value to this many people? So it seemed arbitrary. I kept asking about it. That put me, at odds with my boss, who was, I think, brought in because she was this crack recruiter, but she's in California. Now, so there's that. I'm saying I want to focus on delivery. Yes, I've done all the things. I've turned over the rocks. I've called all the people. I now need to leave them alone for a while and turn my sights to delivering on the retreat we got to plan and all the stuff we got to do. No, you have time for that. Focus on this. So that kept getting pushed. The thing I had to deliver kept getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. I said, we're going to run out of time. We need caterers. I've done event planning. I'm very experienced at this. I was like, can you just let me do my job? No, do this. So we were at odds, and it just kind of came to a head a couple of weeks ago. I won't go into the boring details, but suffice to say that this individual, I think, confronted with the reality of asking me to do things or not to do things that did end up having the repercussions it said that have, needed to offload that to me, and came up with some, ways to do that. But the big thing, there were two big things that were that really pushed me out, that made me feel like I'm not only dealing with somebody whose management style is not conducive to my working style, but also that I'm dealing with someone who fundamentally, philosophically, doesn't like me and what I stand for, and that's a non-starter. Mission aside. And the reason I say that is that they hired a director of education, and they'd let someone go who was wonderful. Like, just, you would love her. She's fantastic, really grounded, reality, etc. She'd been there for 7 years. They downgraded her to consultant, not sure why. They said her lessons were too hard. It's too detailed. The teens can't do it. I'm like, yes, because they're not learning in their schools how to read properly and do things. We're the only thing they might have that's going to give this to them. Yeah, we should keep doing it.
That is such an interesting thing. I know I'm interrupting, but I don't, just to break apart
this was a big bugaboo for me.
I think setting aside the Jewish community, right, and education, I think inner city programs have proven time and time again that the greatest failure that has been done to the Black community in education has been lowering standards. And the people that come in with programs that demand excellence from those from people in those environments that have terrible critical thinking skills, terrible reading skills, terrible math skills. And I'm not saying this to be racist. I'm just saying this about low socioeconomic status communities in America that tend to be predominantly Black. And what they prove time and time again is when you demand excellence and you give them the resources to and the scaffolding, like we said, and and help them along, that they will meet those standards. And that the 100%. Worst thing you can do for children is lower their standards. Obviously you don't want to raise it so high that it's impossible and then tiger mom them, but
when you're also when you're a voluntary organization, when you're an organization that people choose to be part of and they're paying a pretty penny to be part of it, I think you have a duty, really, it's almost like a moral obligation to give them your very, very best, even if they're fewer in number, even if you lose a few people because this is too hard or I don't want to do it. It's just like school or it's hard. I have to do that. Fine, bye. You cannot.
Can I ask you a question here?
lower your standards.
Do you think that because you have objectivist leanings, that there is a fundamental thing that seems obvious to you that doesn't seem obvious to most people? Which is
Probably.
that if a mission is about education of Jewish identity, that most people are seeing it as a collective experience, and you're looking for those gems, those people that are capable of being philosophers, those people that are capable of being greater, and that maybe your idea of high standards conflict with the more collectivist mindset, and that your objectivist leanings just kind of almost, it seems obvious to you, something that isn't necessarily obvious to
I
others?
I think that's very possible. What I will say though is that the woman who was there as director of education is not an objectivist, and she's actually an observant Jew, but she's
There's
very
not a lot of
philosophical.
objectivists in the world.
No, but what I'm saying is, she and I saw eye to eye 100%. We had the same standards. We still do. We're friends. She is a phenomenal educator. She still gets letters from her former students from the organization saying, you were the best teacher I ever had. I learned to think because of you. I learned to write because of you. I learned to speak publicly because of you. So whatever your philosophy may end up being, I think there's, teaching kids to think and giving them the credit for having the ability to learn how to do that wherever they end up. If somebody ends up, they're devout Catholic, I don't care, whatever. But if you arrived at that by your own effort and your own thinking, I'm not trying to create other objectivists. I just want people to be thinkers and at least live in their own, make their own decisions, and don't try to push that on other people. So I certainly am not going to be a hypocrite and say, oh, you should be like me. But what I feel
to be clear,
is
I wasn't saying you're trying to make objectivists.
No.
So much as I'm saying that, like, this focus on high standards of the individual to achieve.
Well,
as opposed to
and also I'm just looking at evidence, like you said. The evidence shows very clearly that when you expect excellence from people who are perfectly organically capable of it, they're not learning disabled, they're not so far behind they can't receive the information, you just need a little scaffolding, you need a little persistence, a little more help. To deny them that, I actually equate with a form of negligence or abuse. I think that if you make your own comfort and your own ease and your own, I need more butts in the seats so I can please those other people, even if, I'm downgrading my expectations, I think that's negligent. I'm sorry, I just do. It goes against my morality. So I started seeing that happening. I started seeing criticism of her lessons. They hired in a woman. I then went and checked her out. And I was like, they're hiring somebody who literally stands for and celebrates everything I've spent the last 3 years, Michael, fighting against. Ed tech is the solution to everything. Black Lives Matter. Retweeting all banned books. Let's read banned books. Like all the things that I've been sitting here going, and all I could think was this woman who I would work for her and the director of programming engagement. I'm like, she's going to take one look at me. Or my social, I immediately went and blocked her on everything. I was like, she's going to take one look at my existence and be like, this woman is 180 degrees from everything that I'm coming in here celebrating and championing. And I realized I'm philosophically doomed. And then, but what really pushed me out as quickly, because I was like, well, I'll just stick around until I get another job, whatever, was that I was asked to build community in Raleigh. I had to reach out to somebody. It was Israeli. And I did, and had a great conversation, whatever. Long story short, she ended up looking at a comment made by a University of North Carolina Chapel Hill professor that was in a group on Facebook that I had posted information about our organization to. And the guy says, this woman is anti-LGBT and she's a racist and she's a this and a that and the other, whatever, who knows what else she's teaching her kids. Okay, because I have a public... So he says this about me. I had two choices. Delete my post advertising our parlor session, info session about our organization and have people wonder what was that about, because he could just come back in and redo it and or I could just leave it there. So when I talked to her on the phone and she said, oh, where can I find your post about I want to share it out? I said, oh yeah, I posted it to the Facebook group already. You'll find it there. And stupid me, I forgot the guy made his comment and she was gay. And so I mentioned to her, I said, oh, if she was looking real time. She's like, I'm going to go look for it. I said, oh, just to alert you, there's some troll out there who's saying things about me. They're not true. Please ignore it. It's completely untrue. I do some work in education, but people love to say things about me. It's absolutely not true. I don't believe any of those things. And my work speaks for itself, blah, blah, blah. But it's great meeting you, et cetera. That was it. That's all I said. She was going to see it like in a nanosecond. The woman was going to pull up and see the thing. We're on the phone. So I say this. 3 days go by. I'm writing her a follow-up. She goes, okay, well, follow up with me. Blah, 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 blah. I wrote a follow-up. 3 days later, my boss calls me into a special meeting. I'm like, is everything okay? And she says, so-and-so, I'm not going to name her names, says she will never work with us or our organization because of you. I'm like, I'm sorry? Apparently, you brought your politics into the conversation on the phone and said some very offensive things to her about LGBT. And I'm like, I did. I know I didn't. I said, no, I didn't. She's like, well, she said it happened, so it happened. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Like, you are my manager and you are not backing me up. I said, so you're telling me I'm lying. You're looking me in the face and you're telling me that this never happened. I was aghast. My jaw was on the floor. I told her the exact same thing I told you. I said, here's what I suspect happened. I said, I think she went, she saw it. She decided to take that guy's word for it rather than the whole hour-long conversation she'd had with me, in which I said nothing of the sort. We talked about our organization. That's it. And she just decided, as so many people do, that she didn't like some of my opinions, but rather than call you and say, cancel this woman, which would sound weird, she made up a story, a tall tale about how I said offensive things to her. Why would I do that, Michael? Who would do that?
So friend-enemy distinction. So also, stop calling me Michael. It's weird.
Sorry. What do you want me to call you? Scott?
You're already a teacher, and you're doing this like I chose a different name. Like when you're in school, and they're like Mr., Mrs.
Okay,
and you're like,
fine.
Okay.
I'll call you whatever you want me to call you. But my point is that I don't even hold those views. So to accuse me of saying something to somebody that I don't even think, it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of one of those situations where I hear the story and I go, yeah, duh. And I'm not trying to be mean to you or like belittle your experience. It's just like, I think this is a kind of a common thing that so many people are seeing, especially in the nonprofit world. Yeah. Right? I mean, nonprofit is where so many activists go to work because it is, it is activism and it is government resources. And with those government resources and things of that nature means that you can sell your empathy. You don't necessarily have to sell an efficient product. Whereas in the business world, if you can try and make your ESG score high, but if your product fails, your ESG score really doesn't matter if your product fails, right? So there's a balance between those two things.
But imagine there's your manager, your direct manager, okay? And they're sitting there basically telling you, I don't want to hear he said, she said. I don't want a back and forth. I don't want to hear. I said, don't you want to hear my side? No, I don't want to hear your side. She doesn't want to work with us. It's something you said to her, and that's the end of the story. And I was so frustrated. Like, I actually followed up with an email, and they didn't officially put me on a PIP, but like basically did. And they wrote up this whole professional growth thing and said, you cannot bring your politics to work. I'm like, so continue not doing what I have not been doing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is just, and then she says, no, she calls a meeting with HR. She says, no, you were doing it because when we hired this education director, I brought it up to my manager. I said, I'll be honest with you, I'm a little concerned. And she said, why? I said, well, as you know, when you hired me, when she wasn't the one who hired me, but she hadn't worked there yet. But when the organization hired me, I was very upfront about my public presence, about the work I've been doing. And they thought it was an asset. They said, this is great. You're well known in the community. We love your work. We agree with your work. So by all means, don't stop doing your work. So I thought I was fine. I said, but now somebody's coming into the organization who literally has worked against everything, or I've worked against them. And I said, so I'm a little concerned, and I want to know what the organization's position is going to be on my continued ability to do my side stuff and or what I've done before. And her comment was, look, we're all professionals here. She said to my face on a Zoom where nobody else was there, she said, I've seen your posts and I don't agree with anything you say, but I'm a professional and so I don't hold it against you. And I'm in that moment, I'm like, block, 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 block. Like, that's a clear sign that you do. And so then when I was in the HR meeting, like a few days later, where I was told, and you brought your politics up in this other meeting, I said, and so did you. And she's like, no, I didn't. I said, you literally looked me in the face and said that you don't agree with my views. that you see on social. She goes, I've never seen your post. And I don't follow your social media. I said, then why would you say that? She said, oh no, I was just saying I disagree with you about ed tech and what you said about the new education director about ed tech. I'm like, why would you, a person with recruiting and marketing background, have an even opinion on ed tech? What opinion you've never been an educator? Don't even BS me in front of the HR director that you didn't say to my face you were looking at my social media and you didn't agree with it. So she flat out lied to my face.
This sounds,
Mean Girls.
I gotta be, yeah, it does, Deb. I gotta be honest with you.
It is.
I'm gonna be a little sexist here, man. It sounds like
no,
a workplace
please.
full of women.
I said it. All right. I said it. That's what it is.
When I was in the army, I had many similar situations.
Yeah.
And this was before, wokeness was kind of infecting everything. I mean, it was there. It's been there since the 90s, really, in institutions and HR departments and stuff. But it didn't really rear its head, right? Like it only kind of popped up a little bit every now and then. And yeah, it's like I worked with exclusively nurses. And so like I would have had like these just catty things that occurred. I don't know. I don't know how to say this without just kind of being sexist, but I do think that there is something to an appropriate balance of men in the workplace and certain positions and jobs that tend to attract women more when they become full of women. I don't know. If I'm being honest, and I always want to be, there's something honest where it becomes this toxic environment.
Yes.
Of like keeping information and tabs and lies and like everything becomes social reputation management based and everything and less about the job itself. And I don't, and
the more direct you are,
that's the separate from the more masculine you are, the more of a problem you are. Yeah.
That's me. I'm the problem child. And so on the one hand, this is really unfortunate because I would like
I said, that's separate from the woke shit.
No. It's totally separate. And in fact, I would say that what did me in more than anybody disagreeing with my views was the attitude towards a person who has a different approach to communication. Now, remember, I was at director level. I was a regional associate director. I wasn't like peon bottom of the barrel. So to talk to me the way I was being talked to treat me like I was some kind of like below administrative assistant, to not even listen to my side of the story when I'm literally in charge of the entire chapter in this region, it was beyond the pale. I'm like, so you hire a person, you're paying me extremely well. You call me a professional.
It doesn't matter. You have the wrong politics. Like, it's like, how can you be so doomer pilled and yet shocked? It is.
Oh no, I'm not shocked. What?
But
no.
You're maybe not shocked, upset, because it proves that you have this little bit of hope in you that got dashed against the rocks. Is that you're upset right now because
it's not that. I think what you're misreading is that
maybe I am. I'm not the one living it.
Well, one problem also with working in a nonprofit is, especially if you have end users or whatever, is the teens, the parents. I had relationships that were extremely positive, extremely fulfilling, uplifting day-to-day work that I was doing, especially when we were in session. So it's the incongruence of the amazing nature of the job and like how fulfilling and wonderful it was. And really, I felt like I was in the right place so very often. And then to have the people who are sort of managing you or telling you how to do that job consistently getting in the way of that and or being hypercritical and micromanaging you and all this kind of stuff. And finally, what ended up doing me in was, to your point, was that realism of realizing people don't change. This is how it is. This person isn't going anywhere. It's going to be a you or her at some point, and you're going to lose because there are more of them than there are you. You've seen this movie before. It's only a matter of time before they conjure up some reason to let you go, quote unquote, with cause. You got to decide for your self-respect and your peace of mind. Are you going to go when the going is on your terms, or are you going to wait and be beaten down some more like a dog because you love the kids and you love the parents and you love the mission? And I said, screw that. I'm out. That's where my objectivism came in and said,
My mother had a similar situation in government work, which was, I think it was finally she got a little bit, I guess you could say yellow pilled or red pilled, whatever you want to say, right? A little anti-government, because my mother is lifelong Democrat, lifelong progressive, but like neoliberal, you know what I mean? Like not like she's not woke so much. She's just like a neoliberal, left-leaning, like thinks Social Security is like amazing and, you know, shit like that, right? So she worked for the Social Security Administration for a while and started doing all of these cases. And her job was to do casework. And, your mic is picking up your clickety-clack typing.
Sorry, I just had to type something in real quick. Sorry, go ahead. I'm listening.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I was just letting you know that your mic was picking it up.
Sorry.
And so, again, it's fine. It's only two of us, so it's not really a big deal. That type of thing is important in like a panel, though.
Oh, yeah, no, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But I said somebody asked me like one of those urgent questions. It's like, oh, God, I have to answer this right away. Sorry.
No,
I was like, wait,
fine,
what? Popped up on my screen.
So she worked for the Social Security Administration, and what she discovered is she worked really, really, really hard to get people their Social Security that like needed it. Now we can have a conversation about nobody needs it because Social Security is a scam, et cetera, et cetera. But like I'm talking about people that like even in a libertarian utopia, if such a thing exists, you know, there would be programs and nonprofits and things to help certain people that are disadvantaged. And
and
we're
you
talking
need
about
some transition because people were robbed all those years of their Social Security. So even though it was given to the younger people or the older people.
So these aren't people that are just getting it by default because they're retiring, right? Like she's working cases with people that are like homeless, mentally ill, severe medical problems, right? And so
widowers, you know, disabled. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And so what would happen is she would work really, really, really harder than anybody else in the office to try and figure out and get these people to get to doctors, talk to doctors, get proper diagnosis, get these people on Social Security. And then the Social Security Administration would be infuriated with her. Oh God, hold on one second. We're back. I forgot that if I don't move my mouse for like 10 minutes, my screens all go to sleep, even though all these other programs are running and everything went black. I was like, no. But no, she would be working, you know, super diligently to get these people on Social Security. And they would be like, oh, you're doing a terrible job. Your numbers are horrible because what you should be doing is just denying these people outright. And then they'll apply again and we'll deny them again. And then like on the third time, you know, by then they'll have their paperwork and everything straight in like a couple years. Like what you need to do is you need to move numbers. You need to get through these cases. And she's like, okay, so you want me to do more cases poorly so that they get recycled for years so that nothing gets done so that we keep being behind on cases instead of just finishing cases. And like she was getting like crapped on all the time at work while there was this young guy who was basically, I don't want to say he was a sociopath because I can't armchair diagnose someone from my mother's work from discussions over the phone, right?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like she could totally be full of it. But the way that she described
him a pragmatist. Let's call him a pragmatist.
From the way that she described him, he was like, yeah, I don't care about any of these people. Like, I get numbers done, baby. That's why I'm the best, right? And like would brag about it and then would constantly be heaped on praise because he did terrible, shoddy work, but nobody cared. And I think it's, you know, the situation you're describing, and again, I'm leaving the wokeness out of it because that's a separate monster. But I think it reminds me, did you ever see that Steve Jobs interview about what killed IBM?
No.
This is I'm gonna find it. But yeah, like, what are your thoughts on that? And then I'll find this.
No.
I think you're gonna like this.
I think what I've come to the conclusion of, and that's why this was sort of I hadn't worked in 7 years for anybody else. I've been working for myself, and I decided I wanted to make real money, you know, not just be scraping by. And I said, you know, I'm going to go get a job, and it took me quite a while to get this job, and I did. But it was an 8-month learning experience to remind me why I spent the prior 7 years working for myself, namely that the way that most organizations work, with very few exceptions, is that middle managers in particular, if there is that layer of middle management, reward those who make them look good. So quality is about making them look good. If you make them look good to somebody above them, then you're doing a good job. If they have to explain what you're doing to their superiors, if they have to justify what you do, especially when they don't know how to do it, or they don't do it, or they're disconnected from it, or whatever, they don't want to be bothered. Your job is make them look good. So the guy you just described, the reason he's getting heaped on praise is that his boss is getting heaped on praise. And then his boss is getting heaped on praise. So they're not looking for what you and I would define as quality, because that doesn't instantly make someone look like, good job. I see a number, boom, good job.
I think it's becoming so much worse as technology develops, because there's this disconnection, and maybe AI will actually solve this, because AI, tends to get more and more accurate information as time goes on. But as it stands right now, and has been since the 90s, I would say, there's this increasing kind of sorry, I'm having like a weird echo in my audio. It's really interesting. Whatever. There's this interesting thing that occurs where there is like metrics designed to, look at performance, etc. And we keep relying more and more on these things. And they're like pieces of metadata that tell a story about people, but that story isn't necessarily true, because the data is the data are only as good as the data are, right? There's, and maybe AI will solve that. I don't know, but there's this kind of like, you kind of get what I'm saying, like where people play to the metric. Sure. And it's becoming worse and worse. But I wanted to show this to you.
Well, it's worse when they don't even take into account data. So remember, I said, I asked her, I said,
just take someone else's word.
Have you ever looked at the demographics of this city? No, I haven't. How do you hold someone accountable to recruit 36 teenagers from a minority of a minority? I mean, like, how do you hold someone accountable to that when you've never even looked? It is completely
we're
outside.
We're in North Carolina, not New York.
Well, and they're always being compared to Brooklyn, Bay Area, and LA, where the other chapters were. And it's like, they're getting it done. They're getting it done. And I'm like,
it's like they have like 100 times the Jews.
Not to mention, they're not in Billy Graham territory, where the pressure on you when you're like the only Jew in your class at public school, because they don't have Jewish day schools here. The one Jewish day school goes to 7th grade. That means all the kids are going either to private, secular school, or they're going to public school, or they're going to Catholic school. And that means they're like, there's one of them or two of them in a class. And now you're saying, hey, come be part of an organization. We're going to be like proudly this thing that lots and lots of people hate right now. And by the way, some of their teachers, even locally, are doing funky things like denying the Holocaust, minimizing the Holocaust, or saying things right out loud in the middle of class like slavery was worse because it lasted longer. So because the Holocaust didn't take place over 89 years, that means, it wasn't as bad. If they'd only killed those 6 million Jews over a period of 89 years, then it would parody. I can't even with this. And that's a fact. Right. That happened right here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I mean, like, I feel like that's a very specific thing, but it is certainly a growing trend. And I do want to talk about that. But before I get into that, I wanted to show this to you and see what your reaction is. Because I think it also kind of illustrates a lot of what we were talking about here. And I'm surprised you haven't seen it before.
I may have. Like, you might refresh my memory. I'm old.
I shared it to you.
Okay. Let's take a look.
Okay.
All right.
We don't have to listen to the whole thing. I'm just curious what you think about this.
We're the ones that got promoted, and therefore they were the ones.
Okay, no, it's not.
There it is.
There we go. Here we go.
They made you cool your heels for a while.
No.
No? Well, Adele Goldberg says otherwise.
What do you mean?
Well, she did the demo when the group came back, and she said that she argued against doing it for 3 hours. And they took you other places and showed you other things while she was arguing.
So you mean they were reluctant to show us the demo?
She was.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Oh, I have no idea.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't remember that. No, I thought you meant something else.
So they were very skillful.
Yeah. But they did show us.
Yeah.
So, and it's good that they showed us, because the technology crashed and burned at Xerox. I thought a lot about that, and I learned more about that.
Okay, so then they edit it randomly. This is the part, right? So he said the technology crashed and burned at Xerox. He's talking about the failure of Xerox. And here, Steve Jobs, you can say what you want about Apple, say what you want about a dude that like, basically didn't invent anything, but just like, whipping Boyd a company into making good products. This is the moment where I was like, oh no, this guy understands something that most of us are forgetting.
That with John Scully later on, and I think I understand it now pretty well. What happens is, like with John Scully, John came from PepsiCo, and they at most would change their product, once every 10 years. I mean, to them, a new product was like a new size bottle, right? So if you were a product person, you couldn't change the course of that company very much. So who influenced the success of PepsiCo? The sales and marketing people. Therefore, they were the ones that got promoted, and therefore they were the ones that ran the company. Well, for PepsiCo, that might have been okay, but it turns out the same thing can happen in technology companies that get monopolies, like, IBM and Xerox. If you were a product person at IBM or Xerox, so you make a better copy or a better computer. So what? When you have a monopoly market share, the company's not any more successful. So the people that can make the company more successful are sales and marketing people, and they end up running the companies. And the product people get driven out of the decision-making forums. And the companies forget what it means to make great products. Sort of the product sensibility and the product genius that brought them to that monopolistic position gets rotted out by people running these companies who have no conception of a good product versus a bad product. They have no conception of the craftsmanship that's required to take a good idea and turn it into a good product. And they really have no feeling in their hearts, usually, about wanting to really help the customers. So that's what happened at Xerox. The people at Xerox PARC used to call the people that ran Xerox toner heads. And these toner heads would come out to Xerox PARC, and they just had no clue about what they were seeing.
And for our audience, toner is what?
Oh, toner is what you put into a copier. Yeah, the toner that you add to an industrial copier.
The black stuff.
The black stuff, yeah. So basically, they were copier heads that just had no clue about a computer or what it could do. And so they just grabbed defeat from the greatest victory in the computer industry. Xerox could have owned the entire computer industry today.
When you were talking about so many of these problems, that's what I was thinking about.
That's
Steve Jobs.
And it's so funny you said that, because I was asked by a friend to write up, because she has access to the board anyway. Would I write up what my observations were, et cetera, of what happened? And I said exactly that. I said that, with the shift in focus to sales and marketing and development and so forth, and away from delivery, will bring it down. You can't, it's not going to grow or survive. Delivery has to be the focus, which is product. In this case, it just happens to be sort of an educational product. Mm-hmm. And what's so funny about that too is, my first job outside of classroom teaching, and remember, I was only in the classroom 2 years. My first job out of classroom teaching, I was an administrative assistant in an HR department for a financial services company, but they found out I had a teaching background. And this was when we were moving from DOS to GUI. And I had experience with Apple. All I had really used in graduate school was a little Macintosh, okay? Now I knew how to use PC, obviously, everyone did. But I had experience with a Mac or an Apple, and all my other compatriots did not. And I was a teacher. And they said, we have a problem. We have administrative assistants who've been working in this company for 10, 15, 20 years, and we're about to make a mass movement to Windows, this thing called Windows, this thing with a GUI interface. And they are rebelling, and they don't want to do it. They know all their DOS prompts, and they know all their stuff, and these are, 50 and 60-year-old women. They don't want to be bothered. We need somebody to put together a training program to acclimate them to this graphic user interface. And it was through that work. And how do you think I did that? How do you think I came up with a curriculum? A 24-year-old, 25-year-old person came up with a way.
You YouTubed it and had a guide.
Yeah. In the early 90s. Yeah, I did that. No, I did what any decent teacher would do. I went and spent time with them. Also, any user experience person would do. I spent time with them and watched them do their jobs now, like with their DOS stuff, with their old school technology. And I asked them lots of questions, and I took lots of notes, and I asked them what their sources of pain were, and so on and so forth. And I figured out how to, because education really is a form of sales, I figured out how to sell them on the value to them of switching to GUI interface. And I then contrived a set of little tutorials and so forth that would show them very quickly how they could do all the things that they thought they were doing so quickly with DOS more quickly with GUI. And suddenly I'm the hero, I'm the great, whatever, but only to them. Do you think I was to the people above me? No. I delivered exactly what they wanted and so on. So, but the point is, he is so right. And when you actually listen to people about what they need out of products and you strive to make a better, you strive to deliver a better product, you can grow and succeed and amazing things can happen. But if you keep saying like, no, I just want more of the same, you stagnate and you die. Yes, you'll make lots of money in the very near term, but that someone's going to eclipse you.
Yeah, I use that clip to show to people sometimes because I think it's a perfect example of exactly how most hierarchies kind of like collapse.
Yep.
And they don't collapse because, you know, they don't collapse because somebody's stealing money. People think that it's like, oh, these greedy people, you know, or they collapse. It's like, no, they collapse because they become inefficient. And I mean, and
they lack imagination. They lack imagination. They lack patience. They lack creativity. So
that's why I love him calling them toner heads, right? Because copy heads, because that's exactly what they do. They copy and paste. They're NPCs. Right? They copy and paste what was done before them, with no imagination, no passion, no creativity, and that's kind of what you were describing to me. And again, this is all separate from the wokeness, which obviously, let's be honest,
that's it. And you know, so bring whatever. I think my boss could have disagreed with every one of my political views and this not have been an issue for us. If she truly were the professional she claimed she was, if she cared most about the end users of our organization, if you cared about the mission of the organization, and she knew good and damn well I wasn't bringing my politics to work, it would have been a non-issue. The parents knew who I was. The kids even probably knew I was on YouTube. In fact, the general director of the organization who hired me was trumpeting it at every turn. Oh, and she has a YouTube channel and she's got a Substack. It's not like they were shy about it. Nobody strove to hide it. So that's why I was like, why are you going with this when what ultimately bothers you is that you gave me a number, I didn't meet it, I gave you lots of rational reasons I didn't meet it, I pushed back and defended myself for not meeting it, and you didn't want to go explain to somebody else why the thing that you were supposed to bring home, which was numbers, didn't happen. You didn't want to defend that because you don't ultimately understand it. And so I get thrown under the bus for some totally unrelated issue. So nobody has to examine the fact that the donors are not being managed properly, because that's scary. That's hard. That takes risk. You have to go to them and say, we so appreciate your donations and we really hope you'll continue to give them to us. We just need to share some insight with you about how your numbers are a little unrealistic. But they don't want to do that. They just want to take the money and run and beat the living daylights out of delivery people. Well, guess what? You're going to lose them. Now, I'm the first to go. I'm not saying other people are heading out the door. I can't speak for them. They probably aren't, because the people who are still there do have a better job of fitting in with the mean girl thing. But I'm one of the oldest people. That was like the second oldest person in the organization at 57. And my IDAF, or what is it? I don't give a fuck. Whatever that is, my button of that is like, it's like, I have no filter. Okay. My filter is professional, but I don't pretend. So I wasn't sitting there going, I don't give a fuck. I was just saying, this is important.
I don't think anyone, an hour and 17 minutes into this, whenever this goes live, I don't think anyone is going to be like, clearly she has a very strong filter. she's keeping a lot close to her chest. But at the same
time, I don't want people watching this going, well, wow, with a mouth like that, no wonder you were treated that way. No, obviously in the worst I got was I did get heated defending myself against lies. Like, who wouldn't sit there and say, that's not true, that didn't happen. Right. But in terms of, and my voice got raised about this volume, and I was told I was yelling. And I'm like, you people haven't heard yelling. You think this is yelling. This is that estrogen shit you were talking about. So you're yelling at me. Why are you yelling?
It is really interesting that it's something that, culturally, there's this weird thing we have where we end up picking political camps, And then there are good ideas and truisms that are found by areas that tend towards a political camp, and then those things get denied. And like one of those things is like a cultural understanding of like what yelling is. I always found that very fascinating, right? Because like it's a very lefty way of looking at the world, right?
Yes.
Right. And it's like, well, what is yelling? It's like this weird thing that I don't think anyone really has a definition for, like a concise one. Like it exists, right? But it's a subjective experience being yelled at, because like someone from Jersey or New York or Philadelphia, or like an Italian or Latino family, right, is going to look very differently at like what yelling is, as opposed to like someone from a more demure culture,
Isn't that
smaller
ironic?
family. Yeah.
Isn't that ironic that the people who are the most woke are the ones who are like, keep your voice down? Also, I got to say this, and I'm not going to name any names, but this woman never met a sentence that didn't need a question mark at the end of it. We always put a question mark at the end of all our sentences.
Yes. Okay.
Talk is how we talk now. Even when we're telling you something that you don't want to hear. Like,
this is one of the things this is one of the things I tell people is like a massive red flag for wokeness that you have to be careful about. Is like and I remember the time like I was streaming maybe like a year ago, and it became, not that I didn't know it before, because I'd been in college, and there was a distinct difference between like my sociology classes, because I got doubled in sociology. And I took gender studies just for the hell of it. You know what I mean? I was like, what are these
just to see what they're doing in there.
And it was like when you take gender studies, women's studies classes, it's funny because you're years ahead. Because like I remember I saw someone being like, these people are saying men can breastfeed. And I'm like, yeah, I was getting that in like 2015. I just happened to be in gender studies, women's studies. So I was getting it like, what you have to understand is what's in those classes. Once those people graduate and then they get a little bit of positions in teaching or in nonprofits or et cetera, then that becomes the thing that goes out, right? So, 5 or 6 years, we'll see sexual citizenship for children. It's in the schools right now. It's not part of the regular curriculum or anything, right? But we'll see sexual citizenship for children in 5 to 7 years. And
I think you're being generous. I think it's gonna be way sooner than that.
Well, so when I say we'll see
generous, meaning to sane people, not to them.
Yeah, when I say we'll see a thing, I don't mean like libs of TikTok will find one crazy person that's doing it in their class. I mean that like the way we're seeing, sexual education, comprehensive sex education, the way that it's like half of the states in the U.S., right? Like that's what I mean when I say we're seeing it. I don't mean it like, oh, some crazy because I don't care particularly too much about one crazy blue-haired, gender fluid weirdo does in their classroom if they're an outlier. Like I care about like the things that nobody's talking about except for people like you and like Lisa Logan and like a couple of other people, which is like, or Moms for Liberty, a couple of these organizations. Like there's a few people that are recognizing that like, hey man, the crazy crap you're seeing on TikTok is like, that's not the fight. The fight is that like the Biden administration just approved like more funding, and that stated that like, social emotional learning doesn't go far enough, and they agree. And like they're the Department of Education is like coming up with new ways to push it further. Like those are the things that are like worrying, not what the normies see, because the normies love the drama and they love the blue-haired crazy person. But fudge. I completely forgot where I was going with this. I got into like a zone down a rabbit hole.
No, but I get the gist of what you're saying though, is that, I mean, I think people are confusing woke with partisan politics, and it's not always aligned. There are woke Republicans. There are woke conservatives. There are woke Christians. It's like they think it's all like that. All leftists or all people on the left are woke. Not all people on the left are leftists, first of all. But people are so into their false binaries because, ironically, that's what's so popular right now, that they forget to look at things in detail, which I think you're looking at things in a more, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, nuanced way. Nuanced. But it is a telltale sign.
Oh, it's a California uptick. I remember now.
Yeah,
that's where I was going originally.
It's Uptalk or California Uptick. She was from California. But the other thing that I couldn't stand is the dishonesty of it all. There's a lack of honesty when you're speaking to someone and you just refuse for some bizarre reason to use the word but. I know we joke about everything everything before the but is a lie, whatever. Okay. But when you're talking about, you're just having a professional conversation and you say things like, I understand that the demographics in Charlotte are what they are. And what you really want to say is, but we're on the hook to the donors. Say it. Don't say, and this is what they would do. They'd say, I understand it, and exactly that exaggerated. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding you when I tell you that they would say, and like it's a big effort. Like it's in all caps and look at me not saying but. Look, I'm not saying but. I'm acknowledging your truth and this truth. And they're coexisting side by side, except one cancels the other out. So it's like, stop it. Be honest.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know
honest.
If that's an interesting thing because like that can go one of two ways. Part of it, yes, and is a really good sales tactic, and it's a really good, and it's something that they teach people in management courses and things like that, because it works, right? Because when people hear a but, they know that you're being negative and that you're being like dismissive of whatever it is that they're saying, and that when you yes and like I hear what you're saying, and I'd like to add this other thing to what you're saying, right? At the same time, what it is, if we were to view language as an ideology, if we were to go all the way back to the postmodernist Lacan, right? And like see, does language inform us of an ideology? If we accept that premise, which I think Lacan was somewhat right about in that, I just think he obviously took it too far, which is what the postmodernists always do, which is essentially nihilism. But if we recognize that the way that we speak and the language we use does also have an ideological bias, the yes and is really just almost like a conversational form of the dialectic. It's you have this truth, I have this other information. These are contradictions. How do we analyze these contradictions and then synthesize these contradictions where you get to have your truth and I get to have my truth, and like the world is better with the synthesis of these two things, instead of simply saying, you have this goal, I have this goal. These goals are opposing goals, and I'm your boss, and my goal has to get met. You know.
And that's fine. And then, but what I think needs to happen, but what needs to happen is that, first of all, people need to be direct and say what you just said. And even then, when you are someone's boss, you need to let the person you're dictating to and saying, look, I have a goal and you have a goal and ours don't align, but I'm your boss, so you have to do what I say. That's true. What I want to know then as the employee is, will you then take accountability or any portion thereof if what I say is likely to occur ends up occurring and what you hope happens doesn't happen? Because it's not entirely within my control. In other words, I couldn't sabotage my way out of, to where I'm right and she's wrong. And, she can't make people join. Like, none of us could make it happen if it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And
reality is not on the playing field. And once reality is not on the playing field, then you can't actually work to solve the problem.
If you're going to have a goal for someone and you're going to say you will be evaluated based on your achievement or lack of achievement of this goal, but you don't give that person any say whatsoever in what the goal should be, and you don't even explain to them where the goal came from. Hey, look, I pulled this thing right out of my ass. Here you go, achieve. That is a recipe for disgruntled employees, first of all. Now, maybe by some miracle they achieve the goal, but it's unlikely. It's very unlikely because people have a tendency to, go achieve this magical thing. And then if you don't, I'm going to blame you 100%.
Yeah.
What?
Or the goal is very achievable if you don't actually give a rat's ass about efficiency.
Right. But when we're talking about what,
just saying.
now
you might be able
parent,
to throw some money in
you're a
marketing
parent,
something and just get random idiots.
Now, here's something that also differentiated me from my boss. I'm the target audience. I'm a secular Jewish parent of a teenager, right?
Right.
She is a 2-year-old and she lives on the other side of the country, okay? And I, as much as I value the mission, I think it's great, etc., I could very well have signed my own kid up, right? She came to work with me last year a lot, but she didn't want to join. She didn't want to join. Now, here's what I can tell you about parents in Charlotte and actually American parents in general right now of teenagers. We're not in a big fat hurry to get into giant conflicts and power struggles with our teenagers. There's a lot going on that they're dealing with, that we're dealing with, that we pick and choose our battles. You probably pick and choose your battles with your toddlers when they're teenagers and they can do some pretty whacked out shit, like secretly go off and take hormones or God only knows what. We're a little bit tentative about what we're going to force our kids to do. So I'm going to parents and saying, hi, will you spend $1,200 across a year to sign your kid up for giving up 2 weekends a year to go have more school about something they may or may not care about or actually kind of tentative about because it puts a target on their backs socially? Don't you want to do that?
I actually, there were 2 things that I wanted to talk to you about today. And we haven't really, we've bounced near them.
Yeah.
Kind of like just by happenstance, and I haven't even targeted it. But I really want to talk about it because, the way that I view you, maybe it's like the old bit of like military jargon stuck in me somewhere or something, but like as like a subject matter expert, right? In the sense that like there are some areas, right? There's some areas that you're really knowledgeable on, and I want to pick your brain about. And one of them, since we're kind of already there, is anti-Semitism. And I want to talk with someone that's actually rational about anti-Semitism instead of what is occurring. What we're seeing, which is that the left is dominating the conversation about this. And the right is terrified of having the conversation at all, if they even care to. And so, it was very interesting. I had this conversation, and I know it's going to sound weird. I'm coming at it from trans discussion, but I promise I'll get there if you let me get there. So I did a big panel, like, maybe like a year and a half ago or close to a year ago. And it was, I had Blair White and I had, Tulip R, Richie, I had Shapeshifter, I had, Buck Angel, and, we had quite a big group of people, right? And we were talking about trans issues. And one of the things that I talked about was, I said, do you guys not feel a kind of a growing fear or anxiety or worry that, like, as this becomes more prominent on the right, as it fights against this, that they're eventually going to target you simply for your identity, because this thing, I was like, I'm seeing more and more, and this was before Matt Walsh and before the other guy from the Daily Wire. We're like just starting to say wild shit, right? I was like, do you not see this? Like, it's like, because what I fear more than the left gaining power is the left pissing off the sleeping giant of the right. And I mean this culturally,
well, remember,
not economically.
The reaction is the action.
Yeah.
The reaction is the action. So James Lindsay just did a podcast the other day about Christian nationalism that everybody needs to listen to, in my opinion, because it touches on this and he talks about that. And I, as a, secular Jew, whatever, agnostic Jew, I've read about the Holocaust and all the, Weimar Republic, et cetera. And that is where we are right now. We are at a place where you've got communists and fascists. They exist. And they're exactly where people have said they exist, left and right. And if you're going to talk about that. And the problem is that the excesses of one that are not mainstream, they're presented as mainstream because of the media.
Always leads to the excesses of the other.
Always. And so what I see is exactly that. I saw it this past weekend. I'm hanging out on X and whatever, and I'm seeing, James makes one statement about something to do with anti-Semitism, and the whole thread, everything after that was like every cockroach in America crawled out from under its rock.
I saw the one that it was like, we're not anti-Semitic, we're counter-Semitic.
We're counter-Semitic. And
then
James goes, sounds like anti-Semitic with more steps.
Right, and I quote tweeted that one. I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was just something like, it was something similar to that, I guess. I don't
Did you see the one that says you have a country
hold
now?
on, pause. I didn't quote tweet that. Michael Skotsky, my booker.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because
you probably saw that the person who said, you have a country now, be a good Jew or leave and go there. And I was oh, okay. I'm sorry. Could you please define for me what being a good little Jew is? I'll be happy to get right on that knot. But what they were essentially saying is that because allegedly Jewish people are disproportionately represented in public and political life and have too much power, it's the age-old tropes. And what always happens, I've studied history. Yeah.
Come on, though. That does exist.
No, see, you're making the same mistake that people make who forget that there is such a thing as, okay, would you say there are more Christians than Jews in America?
Would I say that there are more Christians than Jews in America? Obviously.
Yes. Okay. So therefore, statistically, would you say that there are more Christians in political life and business life and so forth than Jews in America?
Yeah, obviously.
Okay. How many of them do you know for a fact identify as Christian in any meaningful way?
It's super difficult to know because, there's a big difference between your devout Eastern Orthodox Jew and your secular Jew, but the same is true as well of your devout Eastern Orthodox Christian and someone that's a just on Sunday Christian that doesn't.
But my
that's
point
a difficult
is,
thing to know.
Nobody's looking at, let's say, the left. Let's say the people on the right, the anti-Semitism that is mostly rising on the right. The leftist anti-Semitism is less about being anti-Semitic than it is about being pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, and they're perfectly fine with Jews who are Marxists. They're perfectly fine with them.
I think the left,
the right just hates Jews.
I think the right, right? I don't like the term the right because I think real right wingers are accepting of Jews. I think you start talking about when you start getting into fash area, you start getting into third position. And it's I don't even really know that those are right wingers at that point. The types of people that align with the right to call themselves.
It's a you.
Right. But for ease of sake, we're talking about people culturally on the right. And so what I would say is, backing up, I don't think I'm making a mistake. I'm trying to say that technically speaking, when you have a group of people like Ashkenazi Jews that are smarter, their average IQ has been shown in tons of studies. Cope all you want, right wingers, right? They tend to have a higher IQ, and there also tends to be a focus on critical thinking at a very young age, especially with the boys, and with the girls, but especially with the boys and in memorizing. Yes. And you have a religion where whole sections of theory and philosophy is questioning God, as the name implies, as opposed to Islam, which is submission.
You can be an atheist Jew.
Right.
You can be.
So when you take all of these factors together, and then, of course, to give the devil his due, there is going to be nepotism in any system. And there's going to be families, and
that's all I'm saying. Why would you? We tell black people all the time. Let's say a basketball player, he makes it big. He's rich as Croesus, okay? And people are saying, why didn't he go back to his neighborhood and build this or hire people from his? And guess what? Some do. Some black business owners, they hire other people. We never look at that and say, oh my God, that's horrible nepotism. Black business owner hired a bunch of black people to work for them, or gay people hired a bunch of gay people. Nobody criticizes that.
Nobody's calling out J. Cole for living in a black neighborhood, right? It's
thank you.
Yeah. But I just want to be accurate, because I think one of the biggest problems that I see about anti-Semitism and our ability to combat it is the inaccuracies that are promulgated by the left and by centrists that deny things that are technically true and And because certain things are technically true and the conversation is hard to have, then what ends up happening is the white supremacist, the neo-Nazi, the anti-Semitic right-winger, can then make some jokes about it or can talk about it. And then it's like, oh, I'm the only one willing to say the truth because they're the only ones saying some things that are technically true.
Right.
And
the
that
thing
terrifies me.
The reason I stopped you when I was like, wait a minute, when you were saying like disproportionate, whatever, is again, just as with the other conversation we were having about nuance, I just want to stop people and say, okay, if you want to go there, let's go there and then have the full conversation like we just did. Let's touch on IQ. Yeah. Let's talk about apostasy and let's talk about other nepotism and other minority communities. Let's talk about what happens when people are persecuted nearly out of existence. They're probably going to circle the wagon.
Uh-oh. Circle the wagons. Uh-oh. The ADL got her. Oh, no. All right, well, I'm pretty sure it's not me. So let me check. Just make sure, like, I'm good and connected. Oh, yeah, okay, it's definitely her.
Internet, that is so weird.
There
Are
you go.
There?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. But anyway, so I just want to have the complete conversation because unfortunately, if I were to just accept that piece of the truth, because you're right, it is a truth, but if I only just leave that hanging there, that can inadvertently support the trope that follows on from that, which is that disproportionately represented equals controlling. Now, you can be represented in an industry. You can have a lot of people working in a field. It doesn't necessarily mean you control it. And even if you do, then there's a whole separate conversation. Let's say that a certain number of people of a certain background happen to be in controlling interests of, let's take Hollywood as an example. Right. Does it then follow that it's a deep, dark conspiracy? Or could it just be they created the freaking industry on the West Coast because they weren't welcome on the East Coast, and this is what happened?
So let's take your NBA example, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you're a white player in the NBA, and let's remove the woke owners from the equation. All of the woke, ESG billionaires and millionaires that own teams, right? Just remove them from the equation. Imagine you're in the NBA and you just start dropping like the N-word occasionally. Right. How long do you think that would fly in an area that is predominantly full of black people?
Zero amount of time.
Right. Well, I would say the same thing's probably true when you talk about certain areas that tend to have a higher portion. Like when you're in Hollywood. If you start saying a bunch of fucked up stuff about Jews and, your agent is a Jew and like the director of the film you're supposed to be filming on in 3 months is Jewish, and like the insurance agency it's like, is there a disproportionate amount of Jewish people in Hollywood? Absolutely. Why are there a disproportionate amount of Jewish people in Hollywood? Well, there was 4 places where film, if you know your cinema film history, right, was really taking off. It was France, it was Germany, it was Russia, and it was the United States. These were the 4 places where film was really going on. Now, after World War I, we have one of these great films that was born from the Weimar Republic is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, right? And it was an amazing film, mostly because they couldn't afford the lighting to be able to do a film, so they had to paint these jagged things, and it created this crazy idea. It's also where the noir films gained this low lighting thing, is because the old lights were really, really hot and made people sweat, and so they tried to lower the lights, but also because of electricity rationing in Germany, right? So you have people and you have people working in these industries, and these are one of the industries in art where 2 groups have art is a place where throughout history, Jewish people and gay people have flocked to, right? You saw this in Vaudeville, right? There was a lot of Jews and a lot of gay people in Vaudeville. Why? Well, it's because these were places that persecuted people could, well, you know that I can see like that on my screen. These are places that it pops up.
It's supposed to be private.
Yeah, but if I'm maxed out, it pops up.
I'm sorry.
It's private on your end for your stream, but not on my recording. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay. It's great. I appreciate it. But like, these are the areas that happen. And so you have a group of people that move into it. And then, well, Russia starts closing down their film. And you have some Jews that are, involved in the revolution. And you have many, many, many more Jews that fucking fled before the revolution or in the beginnings of the revolution. Right. So you have a ton of Jews that flee in the beginning of the revolution, some Jews that were part of the Bolshevik Revolution. OK, so now where do those people go? Well, they go into Europe. OK, and then as war rumblings are occurring, you know where you don't want to be when you're thinking another war might pop off? Germany or France, especially
That's right.
Germany.
That's
so
exactly
where
right.
does every one of these Jews involved in this area that was already an area that had a lot of Jewish people and had a lot of the LGBT community go? They all go to America. All of them go to America.
That's right.
And yeah, some of them are commie fucks, okay? Artists tend to be commie fucks because they're not grounded in reality. They're cool. You have to control them in society.
They also came from places where the aristocracy, you had a choice, aristocracy or Bolshevism. I mean, it was like there wasn't much in between, especially Russia. And so if you lived most of your life with the Cossacks chasing you around, trying to just kill you randomly one night, or whatever, you would be probably more sympathetic to the people who claimed, wrongly, of course, claimed they were going to liberate you and protect you and all this other kind of garbage, which obviously turned out not to be true. But you're likely going to gravitate towards that. And then, as you know, the East Coast, New Jersey, I believe it was in particular, was where the film industry kind of got started. And there was a fair amount of anti-Semitism where they were not welcome. In fact, Jewish theater was separate, with the Yiddish theater and Jewish vaudeville and all that was completely separate, in part because they weren't welcome in the, the upper crusty theaters. That was like Jewish entertainment. And what was a barren wasteland no one wanted to go to? California. I mean, it was like nothing. It was like the frontier desert. Nothing was there.
What's the story of Jews for the past 2,000 years? Is they go to a barren wasteland and they start something new, and then they piss off all their neighbors, and then they get invaded or messed with in some way, and then they go to a new barren wasteland and they do it all over again.
Right. Pretty soon it'll be Mars. So I'm kidding. But
you might not be, though.
and then we'll be blamed for colonizing Mars. Then somehow some amoeba will be like persecuted by the Jews. Some new life form that we just discovered. In any event, all I care about is I'm not going to sit here and tell people that it's factually inaccurate when they state these things. My suspicion, though, when people jump to that around so many other details and facts, is they're looking for it. And that tells me it's a screen for something else. And what we notice is that anti-Semitism historically rises when the shit hits the fan economically, when there is political upheaval and polarization. We've seen this movie before. And one of the reasons Jews are scapegoated consistently is that even in those tough times, because we're used to weathering tough times, because we're like little freaking squirrels during the good times, and we also take care of our own and all this other kind of stuff and charity, whatever, we don't seem to fall as fast as others. So it looks like, oh, look, they're still doing fine. And on top of that, we're in positions of leadership. They were in Germany. They were in Poland. There were professors. There were business leaders. There were factory owners, because after the pogroms, whatever, they crawled their way to the top and built their own businesses. Now, you're too well off whenever all the rest of us are suffering from the Depression. It's the same story over and over.
What's really interesting is that the right has this odd conception that they're immune to leftism because they're different than the left.
No.
And it's like, it's always leftism. It's what it is. Nazism was leftism. I mean, fascism was leftism.
Collectivism. It's a collectivism.
Well, it's collective. Yeah, I mean, to put it sure, it's collectivism. Yeah, I mean, you could even call it mass. You could even call it altruism if you wanted to go even further, right? I mean, we could name it different ways, but
What you tend to see though is
perspective on economics. Yeah,
the left seems to have a deconstructive vision. Their foundational principle is destruction, and they don't really talk much about the reconstruction. It's always revolution, tear down. The right
ever since Marx,
has
right?
Right, exactly. And the right has a tendency, like this Hayward guy now, whatever, and New Founding and all these people, they tend to have this, we're going to construct the perfect city on a hill. We imagine the perfect Christian, virtuous society where only the virtuous people are in charge and all these lowlives are just. So I see this different. Now, they both essentially want cultural revolution. They both imagine themselves to know better what's best for everybody. It's just that one fashions themselves builders, which is hilarious because when you look at the people who gravitate most quickly to these movements on both sides, they tend to be the leeches of the world. Like, they're not really producers on either left or right. They tend to be more parasitic. And that's not to say that there aren't some creatives and people like that. I'm saying that in general, the people you see going to the protests, going out in the streets and do whatever, you got to wonder, like, what is it that you do all day exactly? Like, what is your great contribution to humankind that we should be so respectful of you? And it's very minimal, if anything.
It's interesting
on both sides.
It's very interesting that you use the word parasitic, because one of my new kind of like top 10 political books that I think everyone should read is The Vampire Economy by Gunter Reimann. I'm sure I'm going to imagine with that big library behind you, you've read it.
No, I haven't actually. So it's going on my list.
Okay. So do you know about the book though?
Yes, I know about the book. I have not read the book.
Okay.
I'm
right.
woefully behind in my economics. I'm woefully behind.
So for the audience,
I've been reading education,
Marxist.
not as much economics.
No, yeah, like I said, you have a specialty, and I love talking to you for that, even though we didn't get to talk about that actual thing this time, but we'll talk about it some other time. It's all right. Is that the main idea behind it is you have a Marxist in 1939 who flees Germany and explains how the German economy, the fascist economy, people give it a bunch of flack because he calls it fascism and not Nazism, and he makes no distinction between them as a communist, which is just funny because there wasn't one in 1939. It's like, true. You try and force a modern lens, but this is before World War II even breaks out, explaining how the fascist economy is super, super anti-capitalist. There's a quote from it. I'll paraphrase it, right? But he basically says, and it's it sticks with me, but it obviously doesn't stick with me enough to memorize it. So we'll take that as you will. But he says, under communism, or under Stalinism or Leninism, I think he says, if you have a cow, the state takes the cow and takes the milk and takes everything and then redistributes milk to you. And under fascism, you have a cow and you own a cow, but you have to pay taxes on the cow, and then you have to you have to pay taxes on the milk, and then you're only allowed to produce the exact amount of milk in the exact ways that they want you to produce, and you can only send and sell the milk to the exact people. So he describes this long, arduous process where basically
in other words,
fascism
what we
is
are.
communism.
He
with
describes
extra
what we
steps.
are right now. That's what we are.
I mean, it's like the fascists won because our economy is so much more fascistic than it was.
100%. And you know that I've said about school choice in particular that it is fascist. It's fascism.
Yeah, oh, for sure. People 100%. Think that's insane. That is one thing that
Go ahead, say it's insane. Prove me wrong. That's what I would say to those people. Prove me wrong.
It's one thing I've wanted to I keep getting people from my community being like, "What the hell is SEL?" And I was like,
"Oh
SEL
God, send them to me."
I do, and I'm like, check out her channel. It's a freaking rabbit hole. It's one of the reasons I want to talk to you, but we'll have to talk about it some other time.
It's a mind fuck, yeah.
and the thing is that the simplest answer I can give to what is social emotional learning is it's multiple forms of Antonio Gramsci's cultural Marxists indoctrinating in your children in education. Yeah. And the second definition I would give is it's old news and you're already behind.
Way behind.
You know what I mean? It's like because once enough people know what social emotional learning is, which I think that we're already there, right? Where enough people know, is that they don't know the other programs. Like, oh, social emotional learning is bad. Okay. So they retreat and then they go to the guidance counselors now, which seems to be like kind of like what they're like the new focus.
This is what I've been telling people when I spoke at Moms for Liberty this summer. I didn't talk. They wanted me to talk about social emotional learning. I said, no, I did that last year. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use social emotional learning as just an example of something that parents, have let get out of hand because they stopped asking questions. And I used a scene from Idiocracy, the one where they're talking about the Brondo. They're sitting in the cabinet meeting and he's like, yeah, but why is it? Why does it have electrolytes? Do you even know what electrolytes are? Right. And there's like circular logic.
But what are electrolytes? It's what plants crave.
What's what they use to make Brondo. So this is where we were with SEL. So what I was trying to teach people is these like 5 questions that you need to ask, which is according to whom and why them? How do you know? And it's like, and then what happens if you're wrong? These are just questions. It's your children. They're going to schools. They're out of your sight and out of your care. You don't know what's being said to them all day. And the parents, they were like, then they came to me an hour. I speak. I show slides. I tell them the questions. I teach them about Mott and Bailey. I teach them all this stuff. At the end, they come up and they go, can I show you some curriculum? Can you tell me, is this SEL? I'm like, okay. So the whole presentation I just gave you, which was that it doesn't matter what they call it, if you don't understand it and you don't understand what's being said to your kid and how it's good for your kid, not neutral, good for your kid. They're spending 13 years of their life there away from you and your influence. If it's not beneficial, then they should not be doing it because that's their freaking childhood.
Listen, parents, listen. Your child is sleeping 8 hours a day. And if they're a teenager, 5 to 6. Okay.
Which makes them more ripe for indoctrination because they're overtired. Colts do that.
There's 6. Yeah, Colts do that. But they're spending 6 hours a day at school. Okay. There's 24 hours in a day. Okay. So you've got them for about 12 hours.
If you're lucky, if you don't work and you pay attention to them. Right. And you pay attention to them and they'll
realistically, you've got them now. There's another 6 hours they're spending on their phones that you let them have.
9, so actually. Really, the recent research is 9. It's 9.
Okay.
Yeah. It's scary, but true. It's scary. I double checked it. 9 hours.
Right. But so what you've got is you've got children for 2 or 3 hours, right? And if you don't know what's going on in school where they have them for 6 or 7, and you don't know what's on their social media programs where they have 9 hours on their phone, like you don't it doesn't matter what they call it. You know what I think the real big weakness here is, and it's really upsetting to me, is because like I've realized as a content creator, as a streamer, etc. I've realized that what people really need is bread and circus. That's pretty much the only way to get any popularity. And they want drama and they want made up drama and BS. They don't want to learn the philosophy. And that's from people that are interested in online politics, much less the average person, right? Because this is already a selecting for a group of people that are, cut above. And it's unfortunate. And it's like the thing that's really unfortunate is that none of these people seem to understand that, you can't look at a policy. You can't look at a program. You can't look at a specific funding or the few actions of a politician. What you have to understand is that all of these things are downstream from culture and culture is downstream from philosophy. And it's like, if you're not able to learn the philosophy and then see the philosophy speaking through a program or a teacher or a person, you have zero chance of fighting this.
No, you have to have one of the first videos I ever made was about my philosophy of education and just philosophy in general. And then later on, less than a year into it, I made one that says, who needs a philosophy of education? You do, like right now. And it was just a 20-minute video. But I keep sending that to parents because I say, before you ask me about this curriculum, this named thing, that named thing, they'll change the name before I'm done explaining it to you. So what difference does it make? I tell people, why did you have children? Answer that question. Why did you have children? Get real tight with that answer and think about it long and hard. And then I want you to think about that first time you look down at that kid and you imagined their life or you had dreams of their life or whatever. Did it include, 21st century skills and a job profile as defined by the government through their public education ed tech with all their data collected on software that was stored somewhere and you don't get access to what it is and who could buy it? Pretty sure it didn't include that. But this is where we are. And so I try to get them really in touch with that like visceral parenting. You're a parent, that sense of like, this is my freaking offspring here. And this is like my soul, like my values wrapped into human. And so they can feel that, because what government does best with all of its, managerial class shit and bureaucracy is it alienates us from our own thoughts and our own sense that we can construe reality for ourselves and figure out what it means. We don't need someone else to tell it what it is. We don't need to turn on CNN to find out what reality is. We can do that all by ourselves. And we know that as kids, strangely enough, that while kids are not rational, they do have a better sense because they're so self-absorbed that, that's a thing that I can figure out. It's a thing all by myself. I don't need, what is this? Somebody tell me. And this is, even if they're wrong, they try to do it themselves. We lost that ability. And I just want parents to get back in touch with their own self. Like, be a human inside your own skin. Stop just being this NPC marching around trying to figure out what makes me fit in and what will bring me the least amount of flack. Because your kid is getting... I told people at Mounts for Liberty, your kid is riding shotgun in your car that you have loaned to a complete stranger every day for 9 months. They're driving around in your car with your kid riding shotgun. That's it. It's it. And you have no idea where they're going or what they're doing or what's being said to them. And when I try to tell you, if your first response is, that can't be true, I can't help you. So look at the results. I tell parents all the time, have your kid read aloud to you. Have your kid tell you the names of the 7 continents, or add and subtract and multiply something, or take them to the grocery store and tell them to estimate the groceries in the cart. They can't do it.
One of the things that I think my parents accidentally did, it was an accidental thing that was a massive protective factor for me that they had, I guarantee they had no idea, right? Was my parents made me, whenever I was like in trouble, they made me copy the Bill of Rights, copy the Constitution, or copy the opening lines of Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
Yep.
Like, and they knew that those were like good things to know, like, and they were just trying to be fancy, and like punish me at the same time. And it's like, those are probably documents you probably don't want to be seen psychologically as punishment. But nevertheless, like, it was like those things really do have, that was the last time we were moving in the right direction as a country, as a society, towards rationalism, towards rational. I don't want to say rationalism because that's a theory but you know what I mean, like towards rationality.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, we've gone away from that. It's like, I think
there used to be a concept of self-evident truths.
Yeah.
We understood that there were
literally
self-evident.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
No, but that was fairly revolutionary for the time. That there were, self-evident truths. And the postmodernists want to throw that out the window. No, there aren't my truth, your truth. There's all kinds of truths, and there aren't any that are self-evident. They're all subjective. So until parents, they don't teach this, and unless you go study it, and then unfortunately a lot of people who study postmodernism get sucked into it. And so how do you explain this? Now, James comes at it from, up here. I try to come down to like maybe kitchen table level. But ultimately, parents have to do the work. There's no easy button on this whole thing. And you just have to decide, what does education mean to me? What did I hope and dream for my kid? Do I want them to just be a cog like in China? Now, there are some people, I've actually met people who say, well, I wouldn't mind that so much, because at least in China, they don't have X or they don't do Y or this and that and the other. I'm like, yeah, they don't speak freely and they can disappear and go to prison if they challenge anything the government says. And if they do one thing too many that you're not supposed to do, they can't even buy groceries. So, but it won't happen to you, I'm sure.
Well,
I'm sure it won't happen to you.
Well, first, even if you think that's a good deal, that's not
There
a
are people
deal
who
that
do,
lasts.
which is so terrifying.
Well, even if you do think that's a good deal, that's fine. That's not even really that terrifying. What's terrifying is that those people vote. But it's not that terrifying that people will give up security and freedom, freedom for security. That's actually fine that those people
just
exist.
go there and do it. Go there and do it. There's a country where they do that. Go there.
The problem is that if you give up all of your freedom for security, what happens when you lose security but you don't have the freedom to do anything about it?
Well,
you will lose
witness
the
the people in foreign countries who aren't allowed to have firearms or any kind of personal weapons of their own. Right. And there'll be people climbing up their fire escape with knives to stab them in their window, and there's nothing they can do. And the police won't even come. Or just look at California.
To tie these two things together, there's this article by a possible neo-Nazi white supremacist gay man, anti-LGBT person who likes going out into the woods with dudes on retreats and is openly pure masculinity and pure gay. Yeah. Jack Donovan, super interesting guy. But nevertheless, he wrote an amazing article called Violence is Golden. And one of the things that I think really kind of marries these two ideas together is like, he talks about how we say all the time that like, I want to live in a non-violent society. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, people use these words unironically, and I think it speaks what you were talking about, this alienation from everything, where like we let the government do so much for us that we have this idea, like we don't even understand what it is we're letting the government do anymore. It's like when you advocate for a law or a traffic ticket or a fine, you don't realize that like what you're actually advocating for is that if that person refuses to comply, that men armed and ready to commit violence will forcibly seize property, and if you try and stop them, they will violently act against it. Like we don't realize that we live in a violent society, that we've just moved the violence over to these other people. And if that in any way feels like, oh, wow, to you, then I think maybe you should realize that you're probably alienated the same way you are in education. That you don't even really know what education is because you're so alienated from it. Like we used to know what education was because we had a personal experience with education. And now that the state does it for us, the first thing you really need to understand is that you have no idea what education is. I have no idea what it is because I'm not an educator.
Well, and the problem is you brought up like the left and the right and anti-Semitism and this and that. And anti-Semitism is just the beginning, the canary in the mine shaft of anti-humanism. I mean, it's just like anti-life. Because it's a
simple answer.
Yeah, it's so simple. It really just comes down to numbers, and it's both the small number and the large number. That disproportionate representation that you talk about, coupled with it being a teeny tiny minority, and that just is why it's the obvious target. But at the same time, we are entering that territory of anti-intellectualism that gets dangerous as well. So the left has done such a great job, such a phenomenal job of making intellectualism seem bad, because they've gone off the rails to crazy town, gazing at their navels and like leaving reason and reality on the, for theory. Okay. So then you got people on the right who were never particularly, I'm not saying all the right. I'm saying there are people, individuals on the right, who were always maybe a little skeptical about the whole academia thing, whatever, for, decent reasons, whatever. But now they've overgeneralized it to say that all manner of analysis and thinking, they go attack James. Oh, you're giving me all this philosophy crap. All this stuff about postmodernism. We just need a Trump. We just need a clean house in the swamp. We just need to get all these people in jail because they're bad people. And I'm like, this is just the mirror image of what they're doing in left, going, reality doesn't exist. We don't need rules and values and whatever I want goes. I mean, they're just mirror images.
I think
I don't need to think about anything. I don't need to make decisions or think that maybe people have a point. And the problem is they're sorry, go ahead.
No, I just think that there's a tendency in the right that I think kind of always exists, which I think is that the right tends to occupy the outsides of the distribution and the left seems to occupy the center of the distribution.
Very good point.
Of intelligence.
Very true. And, somebody said today, they asked something about the left and the right and which was worse, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it's a tie. And I said, they're just different. And my answer was, I said, the left does a better job of making themselves appear serious and mature and adult while behaving like clowns. Meanwhile, the right does a better job of looking like clowns while cloaking themselves in seriousness. And it's like, you guys are like, you're just.
Well, so it seems to me that like the left, like one of the things
they're just inside out of each other.
I looked at COVID data and vaccine skepticism, right? And I remember like when they were really, really pushing the vaccine. Sorry, YouTube. Yeah. And I'll try and be quick about it, but
we're just talking about it.
Right. I'm just talking about it. And what I found was people without a high school education were really skeptical of the vaccine. People with a high school education were skeptical, but not that skeptical. People with a bachelor's degree were super pro-vaccine. People with a master's degree were almost as pro-vaccine as bachelor's degrees, but not quite. And then people that had doctorates and PhDs were the most vaccine skeptic group out of everybody. And so
I have a master's and I was very skeptical. Like, so I guess I don't have a PhD.
I'm generalizing.
But I'm almost there. I know.
Generalizing.
But I was waiting. I was like, wait a minute. Where do I fit in this? So,
right. And so what I think it really showed was the tendency of
But I got that Jewish
beliefs.
thing. So skepticism, it's
I think it shows the tendency of how politics align, at least in terms of intelligence and maybe even wisdom, which is that it seems to me that the ends of the distribution tend to be where the right hangs out. They tend to be the bottom of the distribution, like low socioeconomic status, low education, low IQ individuals, and then like also while simultaneously being really, really, really intelligent people. People that become experts in their field become conservative in that field once they learn a whole bunch about that field. And the left tends to be the silver spoon socialist bachelor's degree holding people that think that they're amazing and super intelligent despite only being ever so slightly above average intelligence.
Yes. And sometimes not even that, because what I notice about people who call themselves progressive or left or whatever is they are some of the least self-aware people you'll ever meet when it comes to their own hypocrisy, their own lack of curiosity, their closed-mindedness. So in other words, everything they claim to stand for, they actually aren't. Yeah, they don't have wisdom. They don't have discernment. Yeah, and so, they may be book smart. They did well at school. I mean, I went to school with tons of them. I went to private school. Every person practically, except for half a dozen exceptions, and I'm one of them, you go to their Facebooks and they're all like, I got my vaccine and I'm these people are, graduated with Latin honors. They went to Ivy schools, whatever. And they think their shit don't stink. But I mean, I never got along with them then. I don't particularly get along with them now. I've always been that weirdo. I've always been this person that you see. There's not a time you go back in my history of life where I was ever anything but this. I've just gotten more comfortable with it in the sense that I used to maybe hide it a little better or keep it under wraps or, just be shy about it. Now I'm just like, I'm not even making any attempt to pretend that I play in your sandbox. I'm not doing it. Anyway, I'm sorry that I would love to keep talking. I could talk to you for, all day, but
this is so chaotic and it's okay. I love it. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's just because we're both talkers and we're just like, we'll go down a rabbit hole.
But I promise, if you want me to come back and talk to your audience about whether it's SEL, whether it's WISC, meaning like community schools, and the latest of like, hey, can we just direct bill Medicaid from the school? Multiple states have that now, so that the school can just send your kid to get medical attention for their mental health and drugs and hormones and things without having to like trouble you with approvals.
I have a large portion of my audience that is like, what the hell is this stuff that's going on in school? And I send them to you and like to like your Twitter or to your YouTube, and they're like, they don't know where to start because it's just so much.
Hard.
So
it's
like,
hard.
yes, I do want to at some point, like,
you know, that's a really
for
good
the
point,
purpose
though.
of something.
But you know, you just gave me an idea, and now that I'm, unemployed, maybe one of my first projects should be like 10 or so short videos. We're talking like 5-minute videos that are just stepping them into it, so that they're just like, start here. And then I just gradually give them bite-sized chunks of information that is distilling down the key things they need to know, and then having
If
10
you could make,
end up in,
if you could make like 10 5-minute videos in a playlist, that is like, what is this? What is this? What is this? What is this? Right.
Yes.
And then like number 10 is like where to get more information and what's the future. And then you could make that into a playlist. I'm telling you, there's so many people that need that.
No. All right. Well, that's my first project. I'll start fleshing it out and make an outline and figure out what those 10 steps are going to be.
Or you can just come talk to me about it.
Maybe we'll do it 12 steps. Let's do a 12-step program to like have you break your addiction to government education.
All right. Well, I'm Scott from Fabian Liberty. You can find me everywhere, Fabian Liberty. I'm still looking for a couple thousand lost friends on X. All right.
So you'll let me know what you're going to do with this and how and when and so forth and so on, right?
I mean, I plan on just putting it out probably this weekend, unedited.
Okay. Go for it. I mean, like I said, they'll see a little bit of the sausage just made me play with my toys over here, but
I'll put some timestamps on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for doing this. I feel like even better about being out of a job than I was before. Out of a job. I put myself here. No regrets. I'm happy. But it really is motivating for me to get back in my zone, back in my element. And if anyone's
I'm happy to see what you do.
The reason we learn.
Yeah. Well, it's been on the screen the whole time on my end. The reason we learn in the top right, that's one of the fringe benefits of the overlay of StreamYards is that it puts the other person in your overlay. And it's just like, it's pretty good. All right. Well, I appreciate you. I'll see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll see you later.